Hi, I'm Medium Invader from the classic video game Space Invaders, and I want to tell you a little bit about where video games came from. A video game is an electronic game that has an interface designed for human interaction on a video device. Simple. Video games are used by scientists, the military, and people like you, and their evolution has spread across arcades, consoles, computers, smartphones, and all kinds of other electronics. These days, video games are everywhere, but they were actually made in science labs. In fact, the earliest US video game patent on record was in 1948, and at the time, it was referred to as a cathode ray tube amusement device. That's a mouthful. Some of the earliest video games include the Nimrod computer, OXO, Tennis for Two, and my personal favorite, Space War. But none of these early video games were ever sold to the public because they were either too huge or too expensive to get out of the lab. This all changed when a man named Ralph Baer looked at his television screen and wondered how else it might be used. In 1972, Baer's idea to get video games out of the science lab and into the living room led to the release of a game console called Odyssey. Odyssey allowed you to play a game on your TV. At about the same time, two other people, Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney, were working on something similar in a little company called Atari. You might have heard of it, and even if you haven't, I'm sure that your dad has. Atari's first major game release was in 1972, an arcade game called Pong. It was an immediate hit, and it's credited as the first commercially successful video game. Atari then released a home version of Pong in 1974. By 1978, competition between Atari and another game company called Midway was heating up. Midway had licensed an arcade game from the Japanese company Taito that put them on the map. The game? Space Invaders. It featured iconic actors like me, and it went on to become the second highest selling arcade game of all time. Space Invaders also helped kick off what is known as the golden age of arcade games. In response, Atari followed with the release of the arcade game Asteroids. It ranked 6th on the list of highest selling arcade games. It was a good game, but it's no Space Invaders. By 1980, color came to arcade games, and this was also the year that another video gaming milestone was born. Pac-Man, created by the Japanese company Namco, was brought to the US by Midway. Important to the spread of video games into popular culture, Pac-Man was a character that could be licensed. It wasn't long before it had a song in the charts, a Saturday morning television show, and all sorts of other products. In just a year, Pac-Man arcade games made over $1 billion in quarters. Then, in 1981, a company called Nintendo started making waves in the US video game market with their release of Donkey Kong. It was the earliest video game to have a storyline. The story went a bit like this. Donkey Kong is the pet of a carpenter named Jumpman. Jumpman mistreats his pet ape, so the ape steals his girlfriend, leaving the game player to assume the role of Jumpman and rescue the girl. Jumpman was eventually renamed to Mario. Other iconic arcade games from the early 80s include Frogger, Dragon's Lair, and Mario Brothers. Perhaps the last iconic game considered to be part of the golden age of arcade games is Double Dragon. It was the first really successful example of the beat-em-up genre. It was released in 1987, and like Donkey Kong, it featured a damsel in distress storyline, a storyline common in many video games. By the mid-90s, the golden age of arcade games was coming to an end, and the home game console was gaining in popularity.
How to make a small game.
On here, we're going to start with a blank text file. We're going to make a quick game today. This one's going to be a snake-like game, and that's going to be the kind of game that used to be on cell phones before smartphones, since I'm a dinosaur. But the original version of the Snake game was also an arcade or PC game or something from the 70s. So we're going into here. We're going to do canvas equals document.get element by ID. It's most verbose and ugly where we have to be doing a little bit of interaction between the HTML and the JavaScript. Once we get this stuff sort of set up, it's not so bad. Get context, and that's going to go graphics context or buffer, and then we've got document.add event listener. Let's set up our keyboard hooks. Key down is all we really need since this game has momentum, like a function called key push, if I can spell push correctly. Let's go and get that stub set up, as well as start off our game on interval timer to call a game function 15 times every second. That's milliseconds, so we're dividing it into it. And it's using low frame rate, since Snake works on a very low frame rate. We're going to have X velocity and Y velocity values for our Snake. Part of the thing about Snake game, right, is that you just push the keys to make the character move, and it keeps on moving with momentum. We're going to switch on the key codes. Some people don't like switch cases. I don't like some people. But more importantly, key codes in particular are a great case for switch cases. It's kind of a natural fit, like peas and carrots. And I'm also going to say, even though I don't have all the key codes memorized because I'm not a nerd. Okay, I'm a nerd. I'm not that much of a nerd. But after 1,000 hours training people one-on-one in game development stuff, you start to figure out that like 37 through 40 is the arrow keys, and it's left and then clockwise. Because you need that kind of stuff on top of your head when you're walking people through stuff on Skype. So okay, so there's our input now handled. We also want to have our player positions equals py equals, let's start in the middle of the world. Board game prototype, etc. When it's a game that's really built around reaction times and angles and spatial layouts, I'm a believer you need it working on machine, because the brain and turns and dice rolls and whatever can't adequately simulate that kind of stuff. Certain kinds of games can be, certain games can't be. I'm a pinball guy. That's my background. That's the type of arcade style gameplay I study. So I'm a big believer in you got to be able to rapidly digital prototype. So anyway, part of my prototyping background was for 7 months. I'm getting so long. For 7 months, I made an experimental gameplay. I ate my tail, so I lost my length. So hey, that part works. Experimental gameplay project every day for 7 months. That's called the Interaction Artist series. Those games are no longer online. Some of them are awful or offensive or other stuff, so I took them down. But they're all in Flash, so some browsers don't like them anyway. That was a decade ago. So anyway, that's also part of why, since I spent 200.
This is on how Mortal Kombat 3 was made. This is the result.
Fight!